reading comes from Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak, which is lovely. It's a small read, but it's one of my all-time favorites. And he, early in the book, he's talking about a period in his early 30s where he started worrying about whether he was spending his life in the right way. And he's describing waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing, and being uncomfortable. And he says, "Then I ran across the old Quaker saying, 'Let your life speak.' I found those words encouraging, and I thought I understood what they meant. Let the highest truths and values guide you. Live up to those demanding standards in everything you do. Because I had heroes at the time who seemed to be doing exactly that, I thought it meant living a life like that of Martin Luther King Jr., or Rosa Parks, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Dorothy Day, a life of high purpose. So I lined up the loftiest ideals I could find and set out to achieve them. The results were rarely admirable, often laughable, and sometimes grotesque. But always they were unreal, a distortion of my true self, as must be the case when one lives from the outside in, not the inside out. I had simply found a noble, is this in quotation, a noble way to live a life that was not my own, a life spent imitating heroes instead of listening to my heart. Today, some 30 years later, let your life speak means something else to me, a meaning faithful both to the ambiguity of those words and to the complexity of my own experience. Before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. Before you tell your life what truths and values you have decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody, what values you represent." When I reread this passage a couple of weeks ago, it occurred to me, we really live mostly from the outside in, and I think to be human beings we have to. We are human because we are socialized, and we connect with each other through means that we're taught through that process of socialization. We can't live without living outside in, but I think there's some truth to this suggestion that Palmer has that we need to learn to work inside out sometimes too, and that's hard to know where to start there. And then I follow an online teacher named Jennifer Loudon, and a couple of weeks ago she had this guided meditation that she presented that I want to share with you, because I think it's an exercise in beginning to get a sense of what inside might feel like. So, and it's actually a rather easy meditation. You don't have to try really hard to do any of this. It's mostly about just being with yourself. So I invite you just to sit however you like. Be comfortable. Be here in this room. Do your best to leave behind what you did yesterday, what you're going to do later this afternoon. And draw your energy in. As you notice where you are in this space, draw your own energy into the middle of your brain. And that's a little bit maybe strange to think of, is where is the middle of your brain? But if you think of going from the front of your forehead, maybe right above your eyebrows, in toward the middle, or the top of your skull, in from the back of your neck, bottom of your skull, in toward the middle, and just be aware there of your midbrain. Breathe, imagine yourself breathing into and out of that space. Just your energy, just you, no one else. Be aware of your energy and your centeredness in the middle of your head. And then drop your attention into the area around your heart. Draw in yourself only, from the front of your chest, behind your sternum, and from the back, maybe underneath, behind your shoulder blades. And draw in toward the center of your chest, the center of your heart. I know they're not exactly in the same place, those centers. But feel in the beating, in that space in the center of your heart, your own self flowing through that space. You don't need to expend any effort to feel your you-ness exactly as you are right now, this moment. And then drop your attention to the area below your belly button. We now sometimes talk about there being a gut brain there. We actually have neurons in our gut and in our heart and in our heads, of course. But there's this ancient power center. A lot of ancient wisdom traditions talk about that area. Sometimes it's labeled the second chakra, but below our waist, in from the front of our bellies and in from the back of our pelvis, in the center there. This center where you can be, where you can sit. And pay attention to that center with no one else's thoughts, no one else's opinions, just you, just yourself, quietly in that center of your power. And then see if you can feel yourself in all three of these power centers at once. In the center of your head, in the center of your heart, the center of your belly, all at one time. How is it to be you in your body? Just you, exactly as you are, with nothing to change, nowhere else to be, just you. Let your body relax around these power centers. What does it feel like to be just with you? Notice around these power centers where your feet and your hands are in space. Let your whole body be here. Can you feel your whole body shimmering with your presence? Light flowing through you perfectly right now. Just you in your body. And as we prepare to come back to a space with each other in it, just you may want to shift your body around, wiggle your shoulders, move your legs. If you had your eyes closed, you may wish to open them whenever you're ready. But I'd like you, as we move on through the morning, to try to hang on to a little sense of that, what it felt like to be you, just you yourself, in the centers of your body. And that if you got a sense of it, that shimmering of your presence, of life flowing through you, and it's in the unique way it can only happen with you. I'd like you to carry that forward, because I think that is what the world needs, is you being yourself at home within yourself. May it be so. So, I have one of these really big topics. The title I chose for this talk is Learning to Be Ourselves. And the subtitle is Vocation and Work. And I am sort of working on the idea of vocation and work this month. And I tend to start, some of you know me well enough to know, I tend to go to history and I tend to go to the dictionary. Okay? So I went those places, and in looking at the idea of vocation, I find that the word itself means, well, you can be translated as calling. It's an English word, we don't have to translate it, but it comes from the Latin root vocare, or if you know Latin, yes, I know it's pronounced vocare, but I wanted you all to know it starts with a V. So it's vocare, which means just to call. That's the verb to call. So a vocation could be defined as a calling. If you look it up in the English dictionary, you end up with two definitions. One is a special urge or inclination to a particular path or a particular I was going to say a particular vocation, a particular job or path through life. But there's a second definition that says a specified occupation, profession, or trade. And those are kind of different. One is sort of everyday, and the other one points to what I think we have a sense that's coming out of medieval European history. A vocation is having something to do with the call to a priestly life or to religious orders. In medieval Europe, or historians' descriptions of medieval Europe, they talk about the three estates. So everybody in medieval society belonged to one of three ways you could live your life. There are those who pray. That's the priests, the monks, the nuns who take vows. Those who fight, that's the nobility. Originally the knights, but then the class of nobility that grew up around them. And those who work, which is basically the rest of us. So you have some who pray, some who fight, and some who work. In reality, it's not quite that neatly divided. It becomes interesting when somebody feels a vocation, a calling to the praying life, and they're from the peasantry. Well, it turns out even if they can manage to get into that life, they occupy a different place in that world than the people who were born into the nobility, who go into the priesthood, or even the monks, the life of monks. But I think we still, religiously especially, often the word vocation does have religious overtones automatically for people. Not always, but often. And when it has those overtones, we do tend to think of a calling, a vocation, as a calling to a particular, very special thing. So ministry is sort of, one of the classic examples of that. And I think that's problematic, because I think everyone is called to something. And I think it is, we all have vocations. So I started looking I went from vocation, and I started looking up other words. So I looked up work, which is, in physics, it's force plus distance, which some of you know the formula on. Yes, you know. But for those of us non-science people, I knew you all would know the formulas. It's effort. Work is effort. It can be physical or mental. It can be about making something, or it can be about doing something. Okay, that's good. And then I went and looked up labor. And labor is work that you do for pay. And it is work that is hard or fatiguing. Oh, and by the way, it's also childbirth. That's almost always sort of the footnote. Like, oh yeah, well, duh. And then I looked up menial, because you often hear labor with the adjective menial, right? So I looked up menial, and this is where I got kind of angry. So menial is defined as not requiring much skill and lacking prestige. Right? You kind of go, huh. And I happen to know that there are some branches of liberal thinking these days, current. I know this from my son, who's in college, so he runs into other young liberals. And some of them think the solution is to take all menial labor away from human beings. We just don't need to do it. We can automate it all. I think this is kind of interesting. I think my gut says that's kind of off base. I live in a body that makes skin that flakes off and creates dust. And the fact that I can program a robot to vacuum up all that dust doesn't mean that I should. Because I have this intuition that if I don't deal with the dust, I'm missing out on a chance to know what it is to live in a body. And I live in a body. I can't escape that yet. Some people apparently have plans for that too. downloading consciousness. That's all kind of amazing, but I have this sense that being in my body is a big part of what it means to be human, and a big part of what I am supposed to be doing in the world. So the idea that the solution to inequity is to simply make nobody menial anymore doesn't quite ring true or attractive to me. So that's menial. And the definition, okay. Lacking prestige, I have a little bit of problem with. Then I went to the etymology, which is also something I always do when I go to the dictionary. The word, and this is where I got mad. The word comes from a French word for household. It's related to a Latin word. It means dwelling. It's the place where you live. It's the house. And all of a sudden it's very clear, menial labor is household labor. Menials, the word menial was, I think, maybe in its earliest usage, assigned to people. People were menials. That meant they were household laborers. And I got mad because we're saying, okay, household work doesn't take any skill, and it's less prestigious, and it is these things, which is why I get mad. But it's also, it doesn't have to be understood that way. It's also women's work, so the feminist part of me got activated. So menial. So I'm a little bit on a quest to retrieve menial as something we all should explore and engage with. So I sort of, I went through all these dictionary things, and I get to the end, and I have this list of things that I think are problematic about our traditional ways of thinking about vocation. So the first is the idea that vocation is limited to a priestly vocation, or a specifically religious vocation, a call to live in a certain relationship with a certain religious institution. We all are UUs. This is kind of foreign to where we live now. I think it's still active in our culture in a lot of ways. And I think that I really want to note that idea of vocation has been greatly expanded, starting with the Reformation, both among Protestants and Catholics in European religion and then in American religion. So there are descriptions of, like, if you ask the question about vocations in a Roman Catholic context, there are official answers. And those are that, but you can have a vocation to religious life, or you can have a vocation to married life, or you can have a vocation to single life, or I think there's another one which is slipping my mind. But the idea is there's all these vocations. They all still have nothing really to do with everydayness of our lives. They have to do with a certain status, a public status, if you will. And it kind of excludes this idea of everyday life and work. Then there's this other version of vocation that has to do with a particular occupation, that definition, and that's vocation is about your job. Well, for some of us, vocation is our job, and usually we're pretty lucky if we can do our vocation for a job. But for a lot of people, vocation has more to do with how you show up to whatever you're doing than what it is you are being paid to do. And I really believe this firmly. Some people find our vocation and express our vocation through our paid employment lives or the things we spend the most amount of time on. Others of us do not. Others of us find it in our, what are called our avocational activities, in our volunteer work, in our family life, in the way we are in our communities, the way we engage, the network of people we know. Some people simply are being who they are, and there is no need to do or be anything else. And that is vocation too, I think. But to go back to the problems with vocation as we have understood it, I think it's pretty clear through a lot of the way we talk about it that some work is valued more than others. I sort of hit the extreme end of that when I got to the etymology of menial. But we also have these ideas that, in the religious sense, for instance, being a minister is often understood as being more special, more gooder, more better than being the people who show up. Yeah, gooder. I know it's not a word, just like I know vocare is really vocare. But, you know, those of us who are ministers mean absolutely nothing if people don't gather in communities that need us. There's no sense in which the different roles we have in being church can really be valued higher or lower. And that goes for all of us. It's the board, the people on the board are wonderful for being on the board, but they're not in and of themselves more special than the people who come and sit in the chairs. I was going to say in the pews, but you don't have to. In the chairs every week and talk and make the coffee. We also tend to have this idea of vocation as a static, external thing about us. Oh, I haven't figured out what my vocation is, or I think I know I have a vocation to this. And there's this sense in which our culture, even with the word call kind of implies something that comes from outside you. You know, in the classical Christian sense, of course, it comes from God. You know, that sense of God being a reality that can issue a call works for some of us and not for others of us. But I also want to question this idea of that call as being external and requiring obedience from us, as being something unconnected from myself and who I am. And finally, well, no, not finally, we also tend to have this idea of self as separate from work. And this is tricky, I think, to say. I kind of am trying to walk a middle road here. I think we are and are not separate from our work. I don't think our work defines our self-worth, which is something we tend to do a lot because the culture says some kinds of work or some kinds of vocations are better, higher, more valuable than others. But we also sometimes then distance ourselves from our work. And we say, well, the work is something I do. It's not really about who I am. And I think just the way being in a body is part of who I am, that I need to embrace and work with and experience more fully, the work we do informs who we are. And I think separating ourselves as if we can just kind of, we're not Lego bricks that can just sort of pop in here and then pop out and go pop in there. And we are more of a piece than that. And we are connected in many ways to many different things, including our work. And finally, I think we have this idea of vocation as private. My vocation is about me. And I don't know, if being an adult has, I guess if I had to sum up what I've learned about being an adult, is that hardly anything's actually about me. Even the things that are most about me are not just about me. They're about where I come from, and they're about the people I'm connected to now, and the claims they have on me and the claims I have on them, and what we give and receive from each other. And vocation, I don't think, is only about individual human beings. I think vocation is also about the groups to which we belong. I think families have vocations. What does this family group do? Stephen Covey does, I think, nice work with that, and sort of, you can build a family culture that says this is our family's mission. I don't remember the way he talks about it specifically. I just remember being impressed that family groups, the people who, and it doesn't have to be two parents and children. It could be the people who share a household or the people who share a neighborhood. They can have missions. Our mission is to enjoy each other, to stay connected, to welcome other people. It's different things for different people. Churches, congregations, I think, have vocations. I think some of, you and I, those of you who've been here last year, we talked some about the unease in the UUA at the moment. And I think that is part of the Unitarian Universalist Association trying to figure out its vocation in the world. What is that association good for? What can we do as UUs? Who can we be in the wider world? And we're figuring that out. And it's hard. It's hard work. It does wake us up in the middle of the night to stare at the ceiling. And sometimes that organizationally looks really, really messy because people are staring at the ceiling and we wish they would just send us the information I need to do my job already. So that all brings me to just the idea that vocation is, it's more open than I've been taught to think of it. And it's also more centered in myself, in my communities, than I was taught as well. I want to retain some of the old, and I think this is why we still use the words of calling and vocation. They have some important ideas that I do want to retain. I think saying something is menial could be saying it's really important. Saying this is of the household, that could be, there are household things here. Like, for instance, if you do not know who makes the coffee, after we leave here, you should go find out, and you should say thank you. I expect that most of you know this already. And I know this is a place where you say thank you, but maybe say it again today. The coffee's really important. Who brought the food that's on the table? Who brought the donuts? I just learned that this morning. I think donuts are very important. So find these things and let's learn how to value menial as part of how we are in the world and how we show up to be with each other. This idea of call, there's a problem with the idea of call as being something totally from the outside and from a God who's not connected to us. But a call, well, first of all, I'm going to go back to our seventh principle. We are all connected. Everything is connected. So to the extent that I would talk about God, I'm always talking about something that flows through me as well as through you and through everything that exists, which makes me a heretic, by the way, in Western theological thought anyway. But this idea of call, I like because it implies that the next step is a response. And I do think in working out who we're meant to be and what we're supposed to do, whether that is 10 years from now or within the next 2 years or this Saturday, we are required to choose. We are required to respond to the options in front of us. And I think that's really hard, and I think it becomes increasingly hard as we have more and more options. And that's, in a lot of ways, the history of the last 100 years or so is about more and more people having more and more options all the time. And it gets hard because to really choose something always means choosing not to do something else. And we can't do it all. We never can do it all. So that idea of choosing leads us to a certain sense of focus, which is where I think the traditional ideas of vocation as something special, extraordinary, a special urge to do something. They're tied to that sense that in order to be effective as human beings, we must make choices about what to leave behind as well as what to pursue. I also really like, and a lot of my historical training was in the medieval period, so this is just my personal bias, but I really like the medieval sensibility of individuals being embedded in communities. Now, I'm not real crazy about the idea of you're born a serf, you'll be a serf, you are a serf, you are not noble, you are not important. And by the way, you end up doing all the fighting anyway, and if you're captured, nobody's going to come ransom you. I'm fine with being able, not having society divided up into estates or castes or anything like that. But I do think we think of vocation as something private and only about me. I think we run the risk of causing real harm in the world. Parker Palmer also has some wonderful reflections on the fact that if you miss your vocation, it's not just a personal tragedy. It also affects all the people around you. Let me read this. Oh, somebody told me before they like Rumi. I wasn't going to read this part, but there's a quotation from Rumi. It says, the poet Rumi has this piercing observation. If you are here unfaithfully with us, you're causing terrible damage. And Parker goes on, he says, if we are unfaithful to true self, we will extract a price from others. We will make promises we cannot keep, build houses from flimsy stuff, conjure dreams that devolve into nightmares, and other people will suffer if we are unfaithful to true self. And I think that's because we really truly are connected. There is no sense in which any of us can just retire from the world and go far away and have no repercussions for anyone else. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. We're here, we are with each other, and what we do and what I do matters to your life, and what you do matters to mine. And that is always true. It's to lesser and greater degrees depending on how those connections, but we are all connected. And so I do like that insistence that vocation has something to do with who we are among the human beings we share the planet with. I would want to broaden it some to include other species, other things. Someday I'll do a sermon called Thinking Like a Mountain. I go to the rocks even when I think about all creation. And this is part of what the human race. Maybe we should talk about the vocation of the human race. Right now we're facing crisis about how we have related to the rest of the world, to the other creatures, but also just the water, the air, the stuff, the coal, the rocks. That we're in crisis because we have thought it was our role to ignore them, and we are learning not. So this is, in a sense, you could see this as a vocational crisis for our race. And what's always interesting to me is this is one crisis for the human race. I see, a dozen other ones. So part of vocation is figuring out which ones do I spend my energy on today? Which ones, do I want to work on long term? Do I do them sequentially? Do I pick up a lot of training everywhere and hope it transfers? How much energy do I have with that? And how much do I have to neglect the other people in my life to go get that training? We're all the time balancing lots of things, which brings us back to the need to choose. And I'd like to suggest that it doesn't really matter what you choose. It matters that you choose well. It matters that you choose faithfully. I'm collecting these ideas. I keep running into people saying they think this is what human beings are for. This is our purpose. Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote a brilliant book last year, was published last year, called Emergent Strategy. I talked about it a little bit when I was here before once. She says maybe our purpose is to love. And it's kind of wonderful because she sets that statement up by talking about dandelions. Dandelions' purpose is to heal. And they are masterful at they turn that flower turns into seeds overnight, which disperse widely. So dandelions are masterful at spreading their healing powers even. Whoa, that's cool. And she talks about mushrooms. Mushrooms' purpose, if you look at them, seems to be to detoxify. They screen toxins out of the soils in which they live. She says, so what are human beings for? Well, maybe our purpose is to love. And I like that. It's hard to define what that means. It's hard to figure out how to choose that vocation and what that means about the smaller choices in our lives. But it works. We all know somewhat what that means. Love. I think there are other ways. I think a lot of people who bend towards science, y'all can tell me in the conversation afterwards if this rings true for you, but a lot of people who kind of go towards scientific thinking and exploration, and people certainly who go toward thinking about spirituality or religion and science, they would say, or what I take from reading what I do of them, is that our purpose as human beings is to wonder, to go, oh my goodness, look at that. Isn't that amazing? And they go into the really small things and go, oh, that's really bad. The whole gut biome thing that people are talking about now, that's really, really cool. How trees talk to each other. and how they're not really separate individuals like we thought they were. That's really cool. You go into space and black holes and quarks and, it's all amazing. It's amazing. So maybe what we're here for is to be curious and to have this sense of wonder and awe in the face of everything that surrounds us, and to think about how we act and how we are and how that fits into that picture of everything that is. So maybe it's wonder. Maybe in indigenous cultures in this continent, as I understand them, as presented by Robin Wall Kimmerer, our purpose is gratitude. Kimmerer talks about mythologies from several different indigenous peoples on this continent, but they tend to have creation stories and wisdom about how to live daily life that say things like, well, we learn, sorry, I should have written notes on this part. But the eagle teaches us, the big picture view. And strawberries bring sweetness. That's their purpose. But every single part of creation, the sun, the moon, the waves, the stars, the flowers, the trees, they all give something to the rest of creation. They all contribute. They all teach each other and us. So then what do human beings do? What's our place? And Kimmerer finds, broadly speaking, in the indigenous cultures of this continent, that the place of human beings is to be grateful, to offer gratitude. Because we are sentient beings, we can notice these other our siblings in creation. We can notice them, what they do, the gifts they bring, and our gift is simply to say thank you. To notice and say thank you. So gratitude. I don't think you can go wrong picking any of those three. You may have other things, and I would love to hear about them when we talk later. Maybe we are here, all of us, human beings, to love. Maybe we are here to wonder. Maybe we are here to offer gratitude. I like those. I think I could do all three. I don't actually think you have to choose one of those and leave the other two behind. So how then, if this is what in the center of your being you are looking for, where are you meant to be? How are you meant to be? And I don't think the where, the what, the how all really can be separated. They're all together in our lives. We do things, but we also are beings. And I think also we relate to where we are, the places. I have again, somebody told me once my sermons are listish. I said, well, yeah, I do that. I give lists. I don't think there's one right answer. I think if you want to think about vocation and explore it, you could do any number of things. Just some random suggestions. Be quiet for a while. Coming to church is one of those ways. You sit quietly with people you know and trust and think for a little while. But you might want to go be quiet walking in the woods, or be quiet alone at home, sitting in your favorite chair, reading, or not reading, and just thinking, writing, or just listening to music, or watching the birds outside. But I do think quiet helps a lot. And we live in a world where we're less and less quiet, less of the time, and so seeking quiet. Oh, yoga. I'm watching you nod. Yes, yoga's a great way to be quiet while you're being in your body. It's a good thing. I also think maybe doing some menial labor could be really good. Dig in and get your hands dirty. Know that we are part of the dirt that this earth is. So scrub a toilet, do some laundry, maybe empty the dishwasher, especially if you're not the person in your house who usually empties the dishwasher. Mow the lawn. Gardeners know what I'm talking about when I talk about. I'm not one of those people, but I get when they talk about what it is to dig into the soil and move it and to grow food. They understand what I'm talking about when I talk about being physically connected to the earth, to our bodies. So You could also maybe just, if you got a sense of being centered when we did that guided meditation, you could start watching for what other things in your life, what other times or places in your life allow that feeling to emerge for you. And just notice them. And then maybe think how you could have more of that, or how you could stay in that sense of yourself, and whether it changes who you are when you go do the next thing. You could, thank the people who do the things that make your world a better place to be. The people who do the menial labor, but also the people who do the other labor, the other work, the thinking, the great authors and artists, or the people who just make your life better for being in it. And of course, experiment with sharing your resources, your time, your energy, your money, your attention. Who do you find? What do you find in the world? What ways of acting in the world do you find that feel aligned with your deepest values? What would it be to be a little more involved, or a little differently involved, or to take on a different role, or to try something different? Church, by the way, I probably don't have to tell you, church usually gives you a whole menu of different things. If you don't remember, you can go back and think through the announcements we heard. Any one of those things could be a way to explore your vocation. So my list could go on, but I'm not going to. What I'd like is to send you forth with maybe just an inclination to pay a little more attention to what is at your center as just you, the you-ness, and how that is connected to everything else that is. And look for, I'm going to say how you're meant, but I don't know who means it, okay? Let's be clear. I don't think there is God already having figured out exactly what you're meant to do. But I don't know another way to say it. What fits? When I say, what are you meant to be? Who are you meant to be? And maybe what I mean is not that it was intended by anybody, but what is it you can be? What is it you can do that no one else can do? And how can you bring more of that into the world? How can you contribute to the world in a way that both fits with who you are, but also fits with who nobody else is, if that makes sense? Because we all are different. And so this is why I can't tell you what you should do, who you should be. And you have to figure that out. And I also want to say, this is not meant to be difficult. This is not meant to be something that wakes you up in fear in the middle of the night. It is a tragedy if you totally miss your calling, but I think if you're paying even a little bit of attention, you're going to get where you need to. You're going to get somewhere worth going. Let me put it that way. And so I want you to let it be about joy, and consider that all work can be holy. All work is sacred when it's aligned with our deepest values. I think the big call that needs the response of our choices, both individually and collectively in our various communities, is to see the holy in all that is, to see the possibilities of holiness in each person, in every situation, in every place. And so I want to leave you with, if I can find the piece of paper I wrote it on, I want to leave you with a benediction from Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. We are going further, past reform to wonder. This requires comprehension that cannot fit in words. Out beyond our children, beyond the end of time, there is a ceaseless cycle, a fractal of sublime, and we come to create it, to soil our hands and faces, loving and loving ourselves and all our places. May it be so. May we be so.